I'm going to ask for everybody to mute themselves, please. I'll I'll see what's stopping every once in a while for questions, or we'll definitely have time for questions at the end. My name is Melinda Hutchinson. I recognize most of you, maybe all of you. So welcome. This is a new webinar that I just put together. So you're my little guinea pigs today. I sort of practiced, so we'll see how it goes. We are talking today about the project director role for your grant project. So for those of you who have had grants before, this will probably be a review, but I'm going to start with the basics and pretty much just talk about what project directors should be expected to do, whether that's you or somebody else in your organization. Like I said, we'll have time for questions at the end, and let's get started. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I decided to call it the Moms of the Grant World. Well, I kind of changed it. We changed it a little bit. The Moms of Your Grants projects, because, you know, and I guess dads too. I guess I should like be the parents of the grant projects. I guess I should be, you know, all encompassing, but basically think of the project director as somebody who's got their finger on everything and knows who belongs where and is keeping their eye on keeping everything going on track. In my life, that's me, the mom. So that's where I came from with that title. Okay, project director basics, which should be a review for some of you that I see on my screen today. Who is your project director? So when you filled out the application, there you have the option of putting three authorized people on your application, your grant application. There's a project director, there's an authorized officer, and then there's space for a third authorized staff person or volunteer, somebody with your organization who can have access to the portal and the application. So the person who's listed as project director is, of course, the person that we expect to be your project director. Sometimes that changes a little bit. I want to remind you all that make sure you look at who you have listed there and make sure they meet the criteria that we're talking about today, because if you need to change them, change out that person or change the access they have to the portal or to the grant project, you're going to want to do that before you get too far into your project. So the person listed as project director should be a staff person with your organization, a board member, a volunteer, somebody who is directly involved with your organization. So we're being a little bit more specific about who it should be. We caution against using like a vendor or a consultant or a contractor, somebody who you're hiring to do the project. That would not be a project director. They may be more of a project manager where they're keeping track of the duties that they have for their part of the project. Project director is overall looking at the whole of your project. And you definitely want that to be somebody who's part of your organization, because they're working not only with your organization, but with our office as the grants office, and also with any vendors or staff or consultants that you're hiring. You also want to make sure that that project director has an assigned login or username and password. So they have their own login to the portal. That will ensure that they can not only get into the application and see it, but they can also have edit access to any of the interim reports or the final report or amendments that they might have to fill out. So by having that username and password, they will have access to all of the information in the portal for your organization. For our part, the grants office, well, I guess I didn't really introduce myself, did I? I thought about it and then I just jumped right into something else. I'm Melinda Hutchinson. I think most of you know me. I am one of the grant specialists with the grants office. And you will see my name pop up quite a bit because I administer the small grants. So if you've had any grants that are $10,000 or less, you'll have seen my name. If you've had large grants and you've had a financial review on your large grants, you've probably seen my name on that because I do the financial reviews for the largest. Like most smaller organizations, there are 4 of us in the grants office. And then we have an assortment of other staff and colleagues who do reviews for us, but we're a pretty small group, 4 in the grants office and about 14, 15 in our department overall. So anyway, so we have the grants office, 4 of us who administer it. And we, as the administrators, consider your project director as the liaison between your organization and our office. So if you have any questions, if we have any questions, we direct them to the project director. We email them. Most of it's by email now. The auto alerts that come through the portal get directed to the project director. So they're kind of our point person. And then, like I said here, correspondence from staff and the grants portal goes to the project director. So you want to make sure that not only does that person have a username and password, but they also have a valid email that they check on a regular basis. Okay, project director duties. I wrote down as many as I could think of, and then I just threw in the other duties as assigned at the end because as those of you in smaller organizations know, we wear lots of hats. We do a lot of different things and share some responsibilities. But for the basics, this is what our project directors are expected to do. First of all, they're going to keep their project running smoothly. So they're familiar with the grant application. They're familiar with the project. They have looked at the agreement or the contract. They know what's expected of them. They'll keep track of your procurement process. So for your hiring, for project staff or for other supplies or whatever you have for your project. And then whatever other grants office requirements, it might be not only procurement, but it might be interim reports. It'll be keeping track of the time frame that you have for the grant project, those sorts of things. Project directors should be tasked to turn in reports on time. So we'll talk a little bit later about our interim reports, which we call conditions or milestones. And we also have amendments, and we have final reports that you might see. Well, the final reports definitely, but amendments you might see as part of your grant project. You want to make sure you get those in on time to keep your project moving at a good speed. Project director should also keep the grants office updated on any changes. So if there are major changes to your grant project, you might need that amendment paperwork that I just mentioned, and we will talk about that in a little bit. I have a slide for that. Project directors have to remember to acknowledge the funding source, which is the legacy amendment, the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment, of which our part is the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Project directors also need to complete and submit the final report and keep all grant project documentation, grant records in a safe place. And then, of course, like I said, other duties as assigned. I think I hit the big ones, though. Those are the main things you're going to want to keep track of. Information you're going to track during your project period. Definitely keep track of your deliverables. I really don't like that word, but it's a good business speak word, I guess, to explain what products you have from the grant project. It's a little easier to say than project products. But whatever is coming out of your grant project. So if it's a manuscript, oral history transcripts, if it's construction drawings, whatever it is, the project director needs to keep track of them, make sure that they're what we're expecting to see from the grants office, because when we read through the application, we're going to look at, okay, what are you saying you're doing in your work plan and timetable? What does that mean for the end of your project? What products are going to be publicly accessible and available to people when this project's done? And that is going to be written into your grant agreement. So make sure that your project director has looked at the final product section in your grant agreement or your contract, so you know what we're going to be expecting to see at the end. Project director should also track time that's put into the project. In-kind time is something that we look for at the end of the project. So if any of your staff or volunteers have put in time on the project, but they are not getting paid, of course, with grant funds, you can track their time and use that as in-kind match, which is something that we do report to the legislature. They are interested not only in seeing where the money goes from this amendment, but also how many people have been hired, how much money has gone into these projects, how many people have put work into it. So the legislators are looking at a few different things that we're tracking for them. So that's why we have some of these requirements on here. Financial documentation, invoices, receipts, and payroll, as applicable. You don't always have staff payroll on your grant project, but any kind of financial documentation where you are expending grant funds or you're expending match, say cash match, on the grant project, you want to make sure you're keeping track of that. That will come up again in the final report, particularly if you have a large grant, but regardless of whether you have a small or a large grant, you still want to keep track of where the money has gone. This kind of goes along with the last slide. Keep all grant records for a minimum of 6 years in case of audit. That is a state requirement. And by all grant records, we're talking about, again, procurement information, any financial documentation. If you have a construction project or a project that has to do with the trades, hiring tradespeople, you want to keep prevailing wage documentation if that applies. And then, of course, you want to keep track of your project progress. A lot of people take all of these papers and they just stick them in a box or a folder and put them in a file. That's fine. If you want to stick them all in a folder on your computer and keep track of them that way, that's fine, as long as you know where they are and you can access them when it comes to reporting, or if the auditor comes in and wants to take a look at what, a little more closely at your project, you'll know exactly where it is. The one exception that I can think of to that 6-year time frame is your grant products. So that end result, that's the public piece to your project, that the manuscript, the oral history transcripts, the construction documents. Those things are publicly available indefinitely. So those don't have a 6-year time limit. Those are going to be available to the public without a time limit, basically. Think of it in those terms. So if you have a researcher, somebody who wants to research your building, somebody who's interested in your research on your town's history, where are they going to go to find that? We talk about public accessibility and a public repository for those things. They should be in that repository, and the public should be able to access those. So, of course, there's an exception to every rule. I had to put that in there. Okay, we're going to move on to condition and milestone reports. I know some of you are veteran grantees, so you've seen these before. So some of this might be a little bit of review. Condition and milestone reports show up in the grants portal as the same report. It's milestone/condition report. When you go into the grant portal, and I have some screenshots we can look at in a little bit. It's the same report. They function a little bit differently. So one question you might have is why do we even have conditions on the grant? You already gave us all the information in your application. Why would we need more information? On occasion, there is some pertinent information that maybe the reviewers thought was unclear, or maybe you forgot some piece of information. Procurement often gets a little bit forgotten as you're busy talking about the project itself. And there are some things that we really need to know in order to make sure that the project's going to be successful. So if that's not there, that's when we add a condition. And then you'll have that interim report to fill out. The condition or interim report does not apply to the required documents. So when you're looking at our grant manual and it has the list of required documentation or information that you need to have when you fill out your application and you upload that information, those things need to be included in order for your application to go ahead. If you don't have them, your application has to be denied and sent back to you, and then you can reapply. Some of these other pieces of information, like procurement, we don't have to turn back the application. We can say, okay, the rest of it makes sense, but we need to know this part before your grant is finished. So that's when we put that condition report on there. Condition reports are not tied to grant payments. They are simply an interim report that we ask for, we review. Once it's approved, you can move on with your project. Milestones, like I said, same form that you're going to be looking at in the grant portal, but milestones are tied to grant payments. So if you have a large grant that is over the $50,000 threshold, you will have portions of those payments paid out during the life of your grant. You'll get about 30 to 40% of your grant up front, and then the rest of it, up to 80%, will be paid out during the life of your grant. Those are where the milestones come in. So when you hit those interim points where we are asking for that information, you report on the procurement, okay, you get another 20% of the grant funds. You do your site visit toward the end, that's another 10% payment. It's kind of it's a compromise that we put together with the Office of Grants Management over at the state, who really looked at our program more as something that should have been or should be a reimbursement program. And we said, well, that's not exactly how our grants worked. We've had grants in this office since around 1969-ish. And a lot of our organizations that we grant to are quite small and don't have the funding to start out a project. That's why they're asking for the grant. So we said, you know, it helps to have that money up front. It helps to have something to start with. So we have this compromise where you get some of it, and then you get a little bit more, and then you get a little bit more. And that's for the large grants, over 50,000. Small grants are paid out up front, and the large grants that are between $10,000 and $50,000 are paid out 90% up front. So another big deal about conditions and milestones, when are they due? You will notice when you go into the grants portal, there are due dates on every one of those reports, whether it's a milestone or condition, if it's an amendment, if it's a final report, they all have due dates on them. The conditions and milestones are product-based. So when you have that information, you can submit the report. When you've gone through the procurement process, for example, when you have the draft report to give us, So they're not focused on the due date as much as they're focused on the product that we need to look at. When I set up the due dates for those, I look at, okay, you've got approximately 12 months to finish your project. And then I look at where should these conditions or milestones fall within that 12 months to make sense. So you're not, stuck with all of these conditions at the beginning or all at the end. We kind of try to spread them out and make them make sense with your whole project. But if you're done with them, definitely get them in, particularly if they're milestones and there's payments attached and you need some money to pay your consultant or contractor. Make sure you get those in so you can get those payments. The one exception is the final report. We'll talk a little bit about final reports later. When you see that due date for the final report, that is a hard and fast due date because the final reports have to be in 30 days after the end date for your grant project. So again, another exception. Amendments. So we talked about conditions and milestones. We're going to talk a little bit about final reports. Amendments come into play when you have extensive project changes that are changing either the end date to your project, so you're looking for an extension. You're changing up the personnel. Maybe somebody left and you need to hire somebody new. Maybe you're finding that the project is way more for one person to handle, so you want to hire a second person instead of the one that you wrote into the grant in the first place. If you have some major budget changes, and if you have some scope changes, so your project was going in this direction and then all of a sudden it veered off and it kind of went a little sideways and you need to make some adjustments. Those are the four major reasons why you'd want to request an amendment. And that's another thing that we'd expect from a project director, that they would contact us and say, our project has changed a little bit. We need to make some changes and have you take a look at whether this still meets standards, whether it still falls under the requirements and the grant project guidelines. When should your project director request this? We generally say as soon as possible. If you know that your project staff is leaving, ask us for an amendment and we can set that up. You can fill it out. We can get it reviewed and hopefully get it approved and then just keep everything moving smoothly. I'm going to say for personnel, particularly if your project director leaves, and we have had this happen, if your project director leaves, you're going to be missing out on information from the grants portal or from our office, because we'll just grab that project director email, assuming they're still there, email them. So if you have your project director leave you or any of your project staff, definitely let us know as soon as you know. All of our grant reviewers, our content reviewers, and those of us in administration who are doing the admin reviews, we do have a 30-day turnaround for all of our reports. So kind of think about that as well. If you're looking at maybe needing an amendment, it's going to be potentially a 30-day turnaround. We do try to get them done earlier if we can. It really depends upon what kind of workload we have. Honestly, there are some times of the year when there's a lot more going on in the grants office. There are a lot more grant deadlines that are overlapping, and there are a lot more reports to look at. So it gets a little crazier than normal. So don't delay, really, is what it boils down to on this slide. I want to point out the budget changes. I have a plus minus 20% on there. That language comes directly from your grant agreement or your grant contract. It says right in the language there, if your budget changes per line item more than 20%, to let us know. And that's again, just to make sure that things are just still moving in the right direction. If you need to add a budget line, definitely we want to make sure that that's something that is allowable through the program. So definitely let us know. The downfall to the amendments is that you do have to email us and ask us to add one. We were hoping that we could set it up so you could push a button and poof, you get your amendment added to your grants portal. It doesn't work quite like that yet. That's like on the list of like to have. So maybe someday the portal will generate those for us. But for now, you just contact us, grants@mnhs.org. One of us can set that up for you. Okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about project expenditures. I think what I'm going to do is get through all the text slides, and then before we go into the portal and look at the screenshots, I'll stop for questions, and we'll see if we have any questions before we finish up with the slide print or the screen prints. So project expenditures, this is a big one for me, particularly because I'm looking at the large grants and the financial reviews at the end of them. But it's also another thing that when the Office of the Legislative Auditor looks at our program, not only are they looking at, hey, did all of the grants you awarded follow your grant guidelines? Are they following the grants manual? They also look at, well, did they spend the money? Did they spend the money on what they said they were going to? Is it something that's allowable by the grant program? That sort of thing. So we do ask you to keep track of expenses during the whole grant period. Keep track of actual expenditures to the penny. And we have gotten that from our finance department. We do have to track to the penny. So it's a little bit different from when you apply and you're looking at that budget and you're just filling out a general budget and you're saying, yeah, I think it's going to be about $5,000 to hire someone, and it's going to be about $1,000 for supplies, and yeah, maybe about another couple thousand for mileage and travel and per diem. And you're just kind of guessing and you're rounding off. Once you get to the actual expenditures, you're going to have all those receipts, invoices, payroll records, and you're going to have those actual amounts that you're going to be recording. And that goes for match as well as your actual expenditures. So any cash or in-kind match that you have can also be actual numbers. I'm going to spend a little tiny amount of time talking about what to do if your project comes either under budget or over budget. If your project comes in under budget, like I said, we track expenditures to the penny. So if you get to the final report and you find that you haven't spent all of it, we do request back the unspent funds. And as long as the funding has not expired, because each fiscal year that the legislature gives us for our allocation, each of those fiscal years has an expiration date on it. If the funding has not expired, we can put it back into the pot of money that we have, and we can grant it in an upcoming grant round. So it just goes back into the program and goes to another grant. If the money has expired, say it's an older grant, took you a little bit longer to wrap it up, and now the funds have expired, it comes back to us, and then we send it back to the state of Minnesota. If your project comes over budget and you end up spending more than you expected to, or more than the grant that you requested, unfortunately for you, that is where your cash or your in-kind match kicks in. So if you have, if you've had a fundraiser or you have some operating funds that you've dedicated to this project, that's where you're going to be using that. And I think we've talked about this a little bit before. Large grants over 10,000 are required to upload all of that information. So that is what I will be looking at when I do your reviews. Okay. More project expenditures. Okay, so there are some grant costs, which of course you've listed in your application, in your budget. I wrote down the general ones that we see most often. We're looking at just direct project costs. So according to the legislature, this program, unlike some other grant programs in the state and even and definitely federal programs, we cannot pay indirect costs. We have to pay just direct project costs. So project personnel, so wages for people who are working on the project. The cost of paying your consultants or your vendors or contractors, project supplies that you need in order to complete the project. It might be a computer, it might be a printer or a scanner, paper and pens. It might be some archival supplies if you're doing a collections and museum collections project. And then if you have travel costs, if you have, say, you're going to be doing oral history and you're interviewing people around the state and you have to drive up to northern Minnesota or down to southern Minnesota or whatever across the state, you can write in your travel costs, your per diem, so you can get meals, mileage, hotel. Those are some of the big direct costs that we see. For match, there are, as I mentioned, two kinds, cash match and in-kind match. So your cash match is, of course, cash, any extra funding that you, from your organization, have had to put into the project. And you can record that, of course, if you have your payroll, if you have your receipts and invoices, if you had somebody, just stop and pick up some supplies, make sure you keep that. Whether it's grant funded or it's a cash match, you're going to want to keep track of that. And then the in-kind match, you're going to document with timesheets from your volunteers or your staff who worked on the project. Staff who are paid as full-time staff members with your organization are not eligible for grant funds to pay their salary. So, however, they can use that time that they've put into the project as in-kind, so they can apply that to the project as a match. And in order to track that, you want to give them a time card to keep track of the dates they worked, the number of hours, the hourly rate or equivalent, and the total amount. We have a form available in the grants portal under forms that you can use. You can use an Excel spreadsheet. You can use a Word doc table, however it works. They can handwrite it. They can type it. Just make sure they keep track of the time they put in and the dates. And word to the wise, when you are using like an Excel spreadsheet that fills in the date for you, make sure you've chosen the option that includes the year. So you've got the month, day, year, because I've noticed that it kind of tends to default to just show the date and the month. And then I don't always know what year the work has taken place. Sometimes I could figure it out. I could guess. But when it's not documented, I'm pretty sure the auditors would look at that and say, how do you know that was 2022? How do you know that wasn't 2020 or 2023? So make sure you have the year on there. Most projects you'll find are, they overlap a year. So you're starting in one fiscal year, one calendar year, and you're overlapping to the next. So make sure the full date is on there. We talked about this already, so I'm just going to leave this up for a minute. I'm going to take a sip of water. You can take a look at my acceptable documentation, timesheets, receipts, paid invoices, payroll documentation. Make sure you have dates on there that include the year. Make sure it's legible so I can read it when I pull it up on my computer. I've seen some where people just like hold up the receipt and take a picture of it. I can't read that. My eyes are not great. So, and when you try to zoom in, they get all blurry and, well, the receipt's not my eyes, but maybe both. But make sure it's legible or I'm going to send it back and ask you for another copy. Okay, sip of water done. I'm going to move on, but if any of you want this slide presentation after I'm done, I can certainly send it to you. And I think John will be posting this online too at some point, probably editing out my silly comments and, you know, just distilling it to the stuff you really need to know. But it will be available. Okay, finally, the final report. This is something I don't hit on until really when you get closer to the end of the report. You will get a reminder through the grants portal, you meaning your project director. Got to bring it back to the project director again. The project director will get a reminder saying, hey, your final report's due in a couple months. You are wrapping up the project, right? And then, oh yeah, that's coming up. So you want to make sure you've got all your information in that file that we talked about earlier. You want to make sure that the financial documentation is there, that your grant documentation is there, that your products are in line and ready to be publicly available when you're done with the project. And if you want some refreshers, you will also get an invitation to the final report webinar, which I do on the first Wednesday of each month at 2 o'clock. We spend about half an hour talking about the final report, what we want to write into that report, and what we need to collect for it. And I'm going to skip this middle part because we already talked about the grant funds. Moving on to acknowledgements. I'm pretty sure you are all very familiar with the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment. Lovely 4-color logo we have here. That should be on all grant products. So if you have a report, if you have construction documents, a manuscript, that logo should be available. And there's also language in your grant contract or your grant agreement, whether you have a small grant or a large grant. I put the section numbers in here. It has language you can use for acknowledging the funding source, and then also you'd have the legacy logo that you can find in your final report or on our website. The final report is way easier to find than finding stuff on our website. So we put it in a couple places for you. If you don't have the room to have both the acknowledgement language and the logo takes precedence. So make sure you're at least using that. And that's a super easy way for the legislators and just general people in Minnesota who have been seeing this logo for about a dozen years or so now, probably more than that. I'm not going to do the math. It's been a little while since we've had these grants. So we've all seen it, and it's a really easy way to say, hey, yeah, that money came from the legacy amendment that we all voted for. So, and we want to keep getting that because it's a 25-year amendment. It goes through 2034. Want the legislators to keep giving us the money for all these great projects. So definitely use that logo. Okay. I'm going to stop and take a breath. And if anybody has questions, please unmute yourself and feel free to ask. And if not, that's fine. I've got some slides I'm going to run through that are just screen prints of different pages from the portal. And then again, we can stop. I see we're at 2:45, so I want to make sure we have a few minutes at the end for questions as well. Okie dokie.
Yeah, this is Ricky Bly. I have a couple of questions.
Yep.
Okay, so on your record keeping for the InKind contribution, is that only for any kind of volunteer hours that are done after a grant is awarded? It wouldn't be for writing the grant?
Correct. That's a great question. Yes, it's just whatever falls within that approved grant period that's listed in your grant agreement. So on the first page of your grant agreement or contract, you'll see that approved project period. It's usually a 12-month period. Some of the large grants, we can push it out a little bit, 12 to 18 months. But yes, it would only count from the time that the grant can start.
Okay, so if a person's never been involved in like a large grant of like what our project is, how would you ever anticipate a number for that? I mean, I know the hours I spent writing the grants that we've been involved with, but the after participation.
Yeah, it kind of depends on what the project is, and I'll give you some ideas from what we've seen. Like for research grants, sometimes the volunteers will they'll commit to doing some research hours on a topic, say for some interpretive signage or for an exhibit. If they maybe, since you're working with historic buildings, if they need to do some history of the building and they're going to be doing some research on that, you can kind of guesstimate how many hours they might be spending. If they need to come and unlock the building for your architect or the consultant or contractor, what kind of time are they spending helping them, answering questions, locking the building, that sort of thing. So it's really a guess, and you can write that into the grant, but at the end, it's going to be the actual numbers, because you'll have then on the back end said, okay, this is really what it took them to, be available in the building and to do the research. And so we're not going to be looking at the application and saying, well, you said your volunteers were going to do 50 hours. If it turns out differently, that's fine.
Okay. That's
fine. We just want to see, what kind of time did it take? How much. And that's what the legislature is looking at too. How much person power did it take to get all these projects done? Okay.
And then another one that's related to the financial records. If your institution has on board as part of their staff a treasurer who's in charge of all the bill paying and keeping track of donations and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Then and they're doing it on, like, say, QuickBooks or whatever, then the documentation that would need to go to the historical society how would you garner that out of someone who's paid to do that? I'm just looking at the project director's responsibility for financial record keeping versus a person who's already involved in the institution who's doing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you might decide that your treasurer is going to be doing the financial piece instead of the project director, and that's fine. They're probably going to be working together on getting those numbers together. Are you asking like how to pull the dollar amounts out of QuickBooks so you know where the grant funds fall?
Yeah.
Or
how then, if you're having to keep track of the payments and that kind of thing, how like, okay, you're paying your engineer this and you're paying your architect this, and then if you ever get to construction phase, and am I clear on this, that like if you ever get to construction phase, which I don't know if we ever will because we've been at this for so long, but then if you have a architect who's your project, not director, but your project manager,
mm-hmm.
and they're doing the getting the vendors and paying the vendors, then how does that translate if a grant is given to the institution, but then the institution just turns around and pays the architect, but the architect is the project manager, and he's paying subcontractors, how does that work then?
Okay, I think I'm understanding. So your organization as the grantee will get all the funding. So then your architect, let's say, will be they're putting in some time as the project manager. They will invoice you for the time they put in, and they will show on the invoice, okay, we spent this amount of time working on this project. We spent this amount of time in travel and mileage, so they'll have their extra costs. They'll bundle that all into one invoice, and they'll invoice you. So then your treasurer would pay that out to them.
Okay, so then what it would, so the details would show up on the invoice from. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and then when it comes to construction, and I'm really more of an museum person than I am a historic preservation person, but generally with the construction, they have an AIA form that shows all of the work they've done and how much of a percentage they've gotten completed. And what we look at is the one where it's 100% complete. So we're looking at that form that the contractor will give to you, and it'll show, how much was paid out, how much is left. We're going to be looking at the total amount at the end, but they'll be sending that to you and getting their bills paid along, like throughout the life of the grant.
Okay.
So, yeah. So your QuickBooks will be able to show that the grant came in, and then that you paid out the invoices for each of the grant expenses. Does that help?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else before I zip through our screenshots and then take more questions? Okay, let's take a look at the portal. I'm gonna I know we're getting short on time here, but so I'm gonna kind of zip through some of this, but this is our login screen. So we talked about way back at the beginning, we talked about the username and password that your project director needs. They can enter it here and click sign in. This should look familiar to those of you who have had grants before. You're going to find everything you need in this gray navigation pane. I guess you can't really see me pointing it out with my little cursor. There we go. The gray navigation pane is where you're going to find all of the stuff you need during your project. So what I'm showing you here are the reports. So I've kind of skipped through the application piece, and I'm going right to reports. Down here we've got reports due. When you click on that, they all pop up in the middle. And actually, I made a very simple dummy example for the purposes of my webinars, and it just has one final report. But if you have a larger grant, you're going to see all of your conditions and milestones and maybe an amendment or two over here, plus the final report. And if your organization has more than one grant open at a time, actually, once you click on reports due over here, every one of them that's due will show up here. Once you click on this side, it'll pop up over here in read only. And in order to get to an edit mode, you should see a little edit button at the top here. If you don't see an edit button, then that probably means you don't have the username and password that access, or you're not listed. Not sure exactly how the security works with Flux. They've done a little bit of adjusting over the years, but if the buttons I'm showing you are missing, definitely let us know and we can do some troubleshooting for you. So you're gonna, here we go, here's my cursor again. You're gonna click on these buttons. You're gonna be able to see all of your report information. The budget here should look very familiar from your application. So what we have is a budget that feeds into the final report for your expenditures to fill out. So this should look very familiar because it's what you filled out as part of your application. And then you're going to, when you get to the end, to the final report, you're going to put in your actuals. And I have a screen to show that in a little bit. So I'm going to just zip through here a little bit. For a report, let's say you've got that interim report that you're sending in. Maybe you've got some construction drawings that you have to show your design reviewer. You're going to upload them to the section that says Upload Reports. Click on the little button, and it pops up a little wizard that you can use to grab all your files from your computer and start your upload. And the handy thing about this little guy is that it will show you when you've got everything uploaded. So it'll count up to 100%, and then it'll show you at the bottom that everything's been uploaded. So when it all says 100% over here, you can X out and it'll go back to your screen. Another nifty thing about the reports in here is that once you're in edit mode, the portal blurs out everything or grays it out on the left side. So you can't go clicking into one of the other options over here while you're in edit mode here. You are stuck editing your report until you click save here at the bottom. Once you click your save button, it will tell you that you have one update. The update tells you that you've done something, in this case, saved your report. And then when you've got everything filled out, your submit now button will be at the bottom. If you've had it sent back to you because we had some questions on it, it might say resubmit, but it will always be in green at the bottom of your screen. And then you'll also be able to tell because your status has changed here. So it won't say new like it does when you have a new report that you're just getting started on. It will show that it's under review, which means that it's in our queue. And then I take it, or Gillian takes it if it's a milestone, and sends it over to the content reviewers to look at. Like I said, if it's returned, it will tell you report returned, sent back for revision. You'll see it back in here. Same thing, you're going to click edit to get back into it, make your corrections, and then click your resubmit button at the bottom. When, if we do need to return a report because we have questions on it, you will see in this little yellow section toward the bottom what our request is, what our questions are. You should also see the name of your reviewer and some way to get a hold of them, either the grants box or their personal email, so you can get a hold of them if you have any questions. I'm kind of zipping through this really kind of quickly because I have to be cognizant of your time, and I'm kind of going over here with all my excitement. Once you click OK and you're ready to submit your report, you get this little box that says, "Hey, are you sure you're gonna submit this? Are you sure?" You want to click OK. Don't X out of it. Don't click cancel, because then it won't go anywhere. It'll sit in your queue, and then you'll think you've sent it, and we'll think you haven't sent it, and it'll just sit and be very lonely. So you want to make sure that you've actually sent it, and then that OK or the submitting part is what sends it to our queue. And once it's in our queue, then we can assign it for review and continue that process. Troubleshooting I kind of talked about along the way, so I'm going to kind of zip through these here. But we talked about edit. You have to click edit in order to get into any of the boxes. We talked about what if it's still in the queue. Make sure you've clicked the submit button. Don't click stuff too fast. If you give it too many commands too close together, the system goes all wonky and then it doesn't do anything. It's just like, you know what, I don't understand what you're saying, and it just kind of sits. Remember, it's still a computer. It's not as fast as our fingers. So give it a little time, let it think, let it finish its save, and then click it, let it finish its submit, and then move on to the next command. Okay, contact information, grants at mnhs.org is the easiest way to get to us in the grants office. There's always at least a couple of us on a daily basis looking at that grants box. So if something comes up that you need an answer to, send it there. We also have our website with all of us listed, mnhs.org/preservation/about. Another reminder for the logo here, of course. Can't forget about that. And thank you very much. 3 o'clock. I did it. I don't have any time for questions, but if you have any questions for me, or I know there are a few staff who are on with me, we can certainly tag team if you want to. If you have any questions and you can stay on, please do, and we can chat. Thank you very much for attending today.
Thank you. So Melinda, I have a question. This is Maureen.
Yep.
So is the in-kind for volunteer, you said earlier, make sure I got this clear. Any in-kind volunteer hours have to be done within the grant timeframe?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Just make sure that I got that correct.
Yep.
Okay. Thank
and
you.
We didn't talk about dollar amounts. I know I get that question often, like how much do volunteers get for their in-kind time? You can use, there's a website called Independent Sector, and they track what is a writer, and they're doing some copy editing for you. I'm just throwing out ideas. What would they charge if they were being paid? You can use that dollar amount. So we're not real fussy about how you use it. If we see something crazy like, you know, a lawyer's $200, $300 an hour, I'm going to be like, seriously, who gets paid? If somebody's getting paid that in this field, I want to know about it.
And how about standard mileage?
We use the federal rate, which I'm not quite sure what it is right now, 58 cents a mile maybe. But if you look at the
independent. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if you just Google the mileage rate for 2022, 2023, whatever year you're working in, you can use that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? If anything comes up too, as you're working on your project, definitely just shoot us an email. We are still mostly, at least partly working from home, some of us more than others. So it's easy to start with an email and then set up an appointment with us. John says it's 62 and a half per miles now. That's awesome. 62 and a half cents per mile.
Yeah, man. Make money by driving.
Yeah. Back in my day, it was like 48 cents.
Yeah, back in my day, I had to pay to travel.
Yeah, really. Okay, folks, any other questions? I didn't do that great a job. Come on, there's got to be questions. Guess not. Super.
Well, we don't have any questions right now, but I'm sure that we'll have plenty of questions in the future. We don't have our signed agreement back yet. So once we see, you know, the detail of that, we'll have questions once we get our bidding done too. I'm Dale Johnson from the Oaks Lakeside Pavilion in Gaylord.
Okay, great.
So,
okay, well, you know where to find us.
yep.
Don't hesitate to email us with your questions.
And we definitely would like a copy of this presentation today.
Okay, great. I will make a note. Okay, I wrote it down. I will take care of that afterwards.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for coming today.
Yeah.